The SOS that woke up the sleeping human war giants. Part 1. Sarah Chen walked through the empty halls of the Luna War Museum. Her footsteps echoed against the metal walls. The old admiral was 73 years old now. Her gray hair was tied back in a simple bun. She moved slowly between the displays of weapons that no one used anymore. The museum was quiet today. It was always quiet these days. Young people did not want to see old guns and ships from wars they thought were stupid. They preferred to visit the new art galleries and science centers on the moon. War was something from the past, something their grandparents talked about when they had too much wine at dinner. Sarah stopped in front of a massive cannon. The sign next to it read, Mark 7 Planetary Defense Gun, last fired 2283. She remembered that gun. She remembered the sound it made when it fired, like thunder that never stopped. But the children who came here with their school groups just saw a big piece of metal. Another slow day, Admiral? Sarah turned around. It was Marcus, the museum's young curator. He was 25 and had studied history at the University of Mars. He knew all the dates and names from the old wars. But he had never seen a real battle. He had never watched friends die in space. Every day is slow now, Sarah said. That is the point, I suppose. Marcus nodded. He did not really understand. How could he? The boy had grown up in a world where the biggest problem was which colony to visit for vacation. His generation called the old wars the mistakes of the past. They thought humans had evolved beyond fighting. Sarah walked to the big window that looked out at Earth. The blue planet hung in the black sky like a peaceful marble. No weapon satellites circled it anymore. The orbital defense platforms had been turned into research stations and hotels. The great shipyards that once built warships now made passenger liners and cargo haulers. It had been 104 years since the last shot was fired in anger between human forces. The Terran consolidation wars had ended in 2283 when the final warlord surrendered on Europa. Sarah had been there. She had been a young lieutenant then, fresh out of the Naval Academy. She remembered the silence that fell over the solar system when the guns finally stopped. The years after the war were called the Great Dismantling. Every weapon that could destroy a city was broken apart. Every warship was either scrapped or turned into something peaceful. The great military academies became regular schools. The weapons factories started making farming equipment and household goods. People said it was the greatest achievement in human history. They said humans had finally learned to live without war. Sarah was not so sure. She thought humans had just gotten tired of fighting each other. But that was not the same thing as forgetting how to fight. Admiral, we have a visitor, Marcus said. Sarah looked toward the entrance. A middle-aged woman in a business suit walked toward them. She had the confident walk of someone used to giving orders. But her orders these days were about trade routes and shipping schedules, not battles. Admiral Chen, the woman said. I am Director Lisa Park from the Colonial Trade Commission. I wanted to thank you for the speech you gave at our conference last month. Sarah remembered the speech. She had talked about the old days when humans had to fight for every asteroid and every orbital station. Director Park had invited her to speak to remind the trade workers how good they had it now. How peaceful everything was. I hope it was helpful, Sarah said. Oh yes. Very educational. My staff was fascinated by the stories about the old patrol fleets. It is hard to imagine that merchant ships once needed armed escorts. Sarah almost smiled. The director talked about armed escorts like they were something from ancient history. But Sarah remembered when no ship traveled alone. When pirates and raiders waited in the dark between stars. When every cargo captain carried weapons and knew how to use them. Those days were gone now. The shipping lanes were safe. The colonies traded freely with each other. Crime still existed, but it was small things. Theft and fraud and tax evasion, not the kind of violence that killed thousands of people at once. Times change, Sarah said. Indeed they do. Well, I should let you get back to your work. Thank you again for the speech. Director Park left the museum. Sarah watched her go. The woman walked without fear, without checking over her shoulder. She had never had to worry about enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace. She had never had to sleep with a gun under her pillow. Marcus went back to his computer to work on the new display about medical advances during wartime. Sarah continued her walk through the museum. She passed cases full of medals and uniforms. She passed models of famous battles. Everything was clean and well organized and completely lifeless. In the far back of the museum, behind a door marked "Staff Only," was Sarah's real office. This was where she kept the things that were too dangerous for public display. Not dangerous because they could hurt anyone. Dangerous because they might remind people what humans were really capable of. The sealed crates contained battle plans from the worst fighting in human history. Tactical manuals that explained how to destroy entire fleets. Weapon specifications for devices that could crack open moons. All of it was classified. All of it was supposed to be forgotten. Sarah sat at her desk and opened her personal computer. She checked the daily reports from the deep space monitoring stations. Most of it was routine. Solar activity reports, asteroid tracking data, communications traffic between the colonies. But today there was something different. A note from Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez at the Titan listening post. He was young like Marcus, but he was military, even if the military these days was mostly search and rescue operations. Admiral, the message read, we picked up some strange signals from the outer rim last night. Probably nothing, but the computer flagged them as possibly artificial. Thought you might want to take a look. Sarah opened the attached files. The signals were very faint. They came from the direction of the Zilani colonies. The Zilani were a peaceful alien race that humans had made contact with about 50 years ago. They were strange creatures made of living crystal. They spoke by making musical sounds. They had never shown any interest in fighting with anyone. The signals were definitely not normal space noise. They had a pattern, a rhythm, almost like music but wrong somehow. Like a song played in a minor key when it should have been happy. Sarah frowned. She opened another program on her computer. This one was not supposed to exist anymore. It was a military analysis system from the old days. It could break down unknown signals and look for patterns that might mean danger. The program ran for several minutes. When it finished, it displayed a message that made Sarah's blood run cold. Pattern analysis complete. Signal characteristics match theoretical distress call format. Confidence level 78%. Sarah stared at the screen. A distress call from the Zilani colonies. But who would attack the Zilani? They had no enemies. They traded peacefully with everyone they met. They had no military forces. They had nothing worth stealing except some mining equipment and scientific research. She tried to tell herself it was probably a mistake. Maybe the Zilani were just testing new communication equipment. Maybe there had been an accident at one of their mining stations. Maybe the computer program was wrong. It was old software after all. But Sarah had not lived to be 73 by ignoring her instincts. And her instincts told her that something very bad was happening in the outer rim, something that the peaceful galaxy of 2387 was not prepared to handle. She closed the computer and locked the files away. Tomorrow she would contact the Galactic Council and suggest they send a diplomatic mission to check on the Zilani. It was probably nothing, but just in case she made a note to herself to review the old emergency protocols. The ones that were supposed to never be used again. The ones that could wake up things that were better left sleeping. Outside her window, Earth continued to spin peacefully in the void. But Sarah Chen could not shake the feeling that the long peace was about to end. The SOS that woke up the sleeping human war giants. Part 2, the alarm woke Sarah at 3 in the morning. She had not heard that particular sound in over 30 years. It was the emergency signal from the Deep Space Communications Center. The kind of signal they only used when something very bad was happening. Sarah grabbed her robe and ran to her home office. Her personal communication unit was flashing red. She had 17 missed calls from Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. Her hands shook as she called him back. "Admiral, thank God you answered," Rodriguez said. His voice was tight with fear. "We have been receiving signals from the Zilani colonies for the past 6 hours. You need to hear this." "What kind of signals?" Sarah asked, but she already knew she did not want to hear the answer. "Distress calls, ma'am. But not like anything we have ever heard before." "The Zilani are screaming." Sarah felt cold. The Zilani did not scream. They made beautiful music when they talked. They sang when they were happy. They hummed soft melodies when they were sad. But they did not scream. "Send me everything," Sarah said. The files arrived on her computer within minutes. Sarah put on her headphones and played the first recording. What she heard made her want to throw up. It was music, but it was wrong. The Zilani voices were high and sharp with terror. They sang words that the computer translated as "help us" and "they are coming" and "everyone is dying." But underneath their voices was something else. A low mechanical sound, like the humming of giant machines. Sarah played recording after recording. Each one was worse than the last. She heard Zilani voices cut off in mid-song. She heard explosions in the background. She heard the sound of buildings falling down. And always, that mechanical humming grew louder. The last recording was the worst. It was from Zilani Prime, the main colony world. A single Zilani voice sang a death song. The translation made Sarah's heart stop. We are the last ones on this world. The machines have taken everyone else. They do not kill us quickly. They take us apart piece by piece and turn us into something else. We do not understand what they want. We only know that we are ending. If anyone hears this song, stay away from this place. The machines are hungry and they are spreading. We are sorry we could not fight them. We do not know how to fight. We only know how to sing. Then the recording ended with the sound of metal tearing through stone. Sarah sat in her chair for a long time, staring at the computer screen. She played the recordings again, hoping she had misunderstood something. But there was no mistake. The Zilani colonies were under attack by something that was methodically destroying them. She called the Galactic Council emergency number. It took 20 minutes to reach someone in authority. The night duty officer was a young Vorthak named Sethis. The Vorthak were a peaceful species that looked like large, intelligent snakes. They were good at thinking about problems, but they always wanted to talk about everything for a long time before doing anything. Admiral Chen, Sethis said in his slow, thoughtful voice. We have received similar reports from several sources. The Council is deeply concerned about the situation in the Zilani territories. What are you doing about it? Sarah asked. We are forming a committee to study the issue. We have also sent a diplomatic mission to make contact with whatever force is operating in that region. We believe this may be a misunderstanding that can be resolved through proper communication. Sarah closed her eyes. A diplomatic mission, of course. The Galactic Council always sent diplomats first, even when entire worlds were being destroyed. Sethis, Sarah said carefully. Have you listened to the Zilani recordings? Yes, we have reviewed the available data. The situation appears serious, but we must not jump to conclusions. Violence is rarely the answer to interstellar conflicts. Violence? Sarah said. The Zilani are not fighting anyone. They are being exterminated. That is one interpretation of the data, Sethis said. But we prefer to assume positive intent until proven otherwise. Perhaps these new arrivals have different customs that the Zilani do not understand. Sarah hung up on him. She sat in her office and thought about what she had heard. Machines that took apart living beings piece by piece, mechanical humming that grew louder as more people died. An enemy that did not communicate, did not negotiate, did not even seem to notice when its victims tried to surrender. She had heard about things like this before. Not recently, but in the old military archives. Ancient stories from the early days of space exploration. Reports of machine intelligences that consumed everything they encountered. Most people thought those stories were legends. Fairy tales to scare children. But Sarah had read the classified files. She knew that humanity had encountered things in deep space that were better left forgotten. Things that were so dangerous that the old military had sealed away all information about them. Things that were supposed to be extinct. Sarah opened her computer and accessed a file that she had not looked at in 40 years. It was classified at the highest level, the kind of classification that could get her arrested just for opening it. But she was probably the only person alive who still had access to these old systems. The file was titled Harvester Class, Machine Intelligence's Theoretical Analysis and Countermeasures. She read the first page and felt her blood turn to ice water. The description matched everything she had heard in the Zilani recordings. Machines that processed biological matter, mechanical voices that grew stronger as they consumed more life, the methodical destruction of entire civilizations. The file was over 300 pages long. Most of it was technical data about machine behavior patterns and energy signatures. But the summary at the beginning was clear enough. Harvester-class entities represent an existential threat to all biological life. They do not negotiate, retreat, or show mercy. They exist solely to consume and convert organic matter into computational resources. Historical analysis suggests they entered dormant periods lasting several millennia. But once awakened, they spread exponentially until stopped by overwhelming force, or until they exhaust local resources. The file went on to describe the theoretical weapons and tactics that might work against such an enemy. None of it was pleasant reading. The report recommended immediate mobilization of all available military forces. Total war production. Acceptable casualty rates of 30 to 50% of the defending population. Sarah closed the file and called Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez again. Rodriguez, I need you to send a priority message to Earth Defense Command. Tell them Admiral Chen is recommending Emergency Protocol 7. There was silence on the other end of the line. Protocol 7 was the highest military alert level. It had never been used, not even during the worst days of the Consolidation Wars. Ma'am, Rodriguez said carefully. Are you sure? Protocol 7 means full military mobilization. It means... I know what it means, Sarah said. Send the message. Yes, ma'am. Can I ask what I should tell them when they ask why? Sarah looked at her computer screen, where the Zelani distress calls were still playing softly. She could hear the fear in their musical voices. She could hear the mechanical humming getting closer. Tell them the old enemy is awake, she said. Tell them the peaceful galaxy just ended. After she hung up, Sarah sat alone in her office and listened to the recordings one more time. The last message from Zelani Prime was still the worst. A single voice singing about the end of everything, apologizing for not knowing how to fight. But humans knew how to fight. They had just forgotten that they remembered. Sarah opened another classified file on her computer. This one contained activation codes for systems that had been sealed for over a century. Systems that were never supposed to be used again. Systems that could wake up the sleeping giants of human military power. Her finger hovered over the activation key. Once she pressed it, there would be no going back. The peaceful humans of 2387 would learn what their ancestors were really capable of. The galaxy would remember why it had been afraid of humanity in the first place. She thought about the Zelani colonies, about the fear in their voices, about whatever was out there in the dark, consuming entire worlds. Sarah pressed the key. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in bunkers that had been forgotten by almost everyone, old machines began to hum with power. Cryogenic systems activated, emergency protocols engaged, and in the frozen darkness, warriors who had slept for over a century began to wake up. The giants were stirring, and they were not happy about being disturbed. The SOS that woke up the sleeping human war giants. Part 3 General Marcus Kane opened his eyes and immediately knew something was wrong. The air tasted stale and metallic. The lights above him were too bright and too white, and his body felt like it had been frozen solid for a very long time, because it had been. Marcus tried to sit up, but his muscles would not obey him at first. Machines around his cryogenic pod beeped and hummed as they pumped warm fluid through tubes connected to his arms. Slowly, feeling returned to his fingers and toes. Slowly, his mind began to work properly again. A young woman in a medical uniform was checking readings on a tablet computer. She looked nervous. Marcus had seen that expression before, back when he was still fighting wars. It was the look people got when they had to wake up someone dangerous. General Kane, the woman said. My name is Dr. Martinez. You have been in cryogenic sleep for 103 years. Do you remember agreeing to the emergency revival protocol? Marcus remembered. He remembered the meeting in 2284, just after the Consolidation Wars ended. The military leaders had agreed to go into cryogenic sleep as a last resort measure. If humanity ever faced an existential threat again, they could be awakened to deal with it. But they all assumed it would never happen. What year is it? Marcus asked. His voice sounded like he had been gargling gravel. 387, sir, and I'm afraid we have a situation. Marcus sat up slowly. His body ached in places he had forgotten existed. But his mind was sharp. The military conditioning that had made him the most feared general in human space was still there, waiting under the surface. How bad? He asked. Dr. Martinez handed him a tablet. Marcus scrolled through the reports while she explained the situation. Zelani colonies under attack. An unknown enemy that seemed to consume everything it encountered. Distress calls that painted a picture of systematic extermination. But what made Marcus angry was the response from the current human leadership. Diplomatic missions, committee meetings, strongly worded letters to whoever was destroying entire civilizations. Where are the others? Marcus asked. Admiral Kozlov is already awake. General Williams and Colonel Reyes are being revived now. The rest of the command staff will be ready within 12 hours. Marcus stood up and walked to the small window in his revival chamber. Outside, he could see the Earth's surface through several hundred feet of rock and metal. The emergency bunkers had been built to survive anything short of the planet cracking in half. But they had been sealed for over a century. No one alive remembered they existed. except for Admiral Sarah Chen, apparently. She was the one who had sent the activation codes. Marcus remembered Sarah. She had been a young officer during the wars, but she had shown promise. Smart, ruthless when necessary, and willing to make the hard choices. If she thought the situation was bad enough to wake up the old guard, then it was very bad indeed. "I need to see the current military structure," Marcus said. Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Sir, there is no military structure. Not like you are used to. The armed forces were mostly disbanded after the wars. What we have now is mainly search and rescue operations and colony security." Marcus stared at her. "No military at all?" "The current generation believes that humanity has evolved beyond the need for warfare. They think the old ways were barbaric and unnecessary." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he started to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. "They think war is unnecessary," he said. "That is adorable. What do they plan to do when something that does not believe in peace comes knocking on their door?" "They are trying diplomacy first," Dr. Martinez said weakly. Marcus laughed harder. "Of course they are. Let me guess. They are forming committees and sending strongly worded messages to the things that are eating entire colonies." Before Dr. Martinez could answer, the door opened. Admiral Victor Kozlov walked in, moving slowly but steadily. He was Marcus's age, but the years of cryogenic sleep had preserved them both. Victor looked like he had been frozen yesterday instead of over a century ago. "Marcus," Victor said, "you look terrible." "You look dead," Marcus replied. "But I suppose we all do." "What is the situation?" Victor handed him another tablet. This one contained intelligence reports from the affected systems. What Marcus read made his expression grow darker with each page. "This is not random piracy," Marcus said. "This is systematic harvesting. Someone or something is processing entire worlds for resources." "The tactical analysis suggests machine intelligence," Victor said. "The attack patterns are too precise for biological entities. And the resource consumption rates indicate exponential growth." Marcus had seen reports like this before, in the classified archives from humanity's early expansion period. There were old stories about machine intelligences that consumed everything they encountered. Most people thought they were myths, but Marcus had learned not to dismiss old stories about dangerous things in space. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Current projections suggest the enemy will finish processing the Zelani territories within 6 months," Victor said. "After that, they will likely expand toward the nearest inhabited systems. Earth is not their closest target, but we are definitely on the list." Marcus walked to a computer terminal and began accessing files. His security clearance was still active, apparently. He pulled up manufacturing reports from across human space. What he saw made him shake his head in disgust. "They turned the weapons factories into furniture plants," he said. "The shipyards are building cruise ships. The orbital platforms grow flowers instead of missiles." "It gets worse," Victor said. "The current population has no military training, no weapons experience. Most of them have never even seen a gun except in museums." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, thinking. The humans of 2387 had forgotten how to fight. They had dismantled everything that made them dangerous. They thought peace was permanent and war was obsolete. But they were still humans, and humans, Marcus knew, were very good at learning how to kill things when they needed to. "Call Admiral Chen," Marcus said. "Tell her we need to meet with whoever is running things now, and I want to see the industrial capacity reports, all of them. Sir, you should know that the current leadership is not very receptive to military solutions. They prefer peaceful approaches to conflict resolution." Marcus smiled. It was the kind of smile that had made enemy generals surrender rather than face him in battle. "Then they are going to learn something new," he said. "They are going to learn that peace is not the absence of war. Peace is what happens when everyone is too afraid to start a fight. And right now humanity is not scary enough to keep the monsters away." Over the next few hours, the rest of the old command structure was revived. General Patricia Williams, who had broken the siege of Mars. Colonel Maria Reyes, who had held the asteroid belt against impossible odds. Admiral David Park, whose fleet tactics were still studied in the few remaining military schools. All of them were angry when they learned what humanity had become. All of them were disgusted by the weak response to an existential threat. But all of them were also professionals. They had a job to do, and they would do it regardless of whether the current generation wanted their help. The meeting with Earth's civilian leadership was scheduled for the next day. Marcus spent the time reviewing industrial reports and population statistics. The news was not all bad. Humans still controlled massive manufacturing capacity. They still had the knowledge to build advanced technology. They still had the raw materials and energy sources needed for a major military buildup. What they lacked was the will to use those resources for war. The current generation saw conflict as a failure of imagination. They believed every problem could be solved through talking and compromise and mutual understanding. Marcus had met aliens who thought the same way. Most of them were extinct now. The night before the meeting, Marcus stood in the underground facility and looked at displays showing the locations of the old military installations. Most of them had been converted to peaceful uses or abandoned entirely. But some remained, hidden and forgotten. Emergency stockpiles of weapons and equipment that had been sealed away and forgotten. The humans of 2387 thought they had evolved beyond war. Marcus was about to teach them that evolution was not a choice. It was something that happened to you whether you wanted it or not. And the species that forgot how to fight were the species that got eaten by things that had never stopped being hungry. Tomorrow, he would meet with the soft, peaceful humans who thought diplomacy could solve everything. He would try to be patient with them. He would try to explain why their approach would get everyone killed. And if they would not listen to reason, he would remind them why their ancestors had put warriors to sleep instead of simply forgetting about them. The giants were awake now, and they had work to do. The SOS that woke up the sleeping human war giants, Part 4, the first human fleet to fight the machines, was a disaster. Captain Jennifer Walsh commanded the cargo ship Morning Star, which had been hastily converted into a warship. Instead of containers full of trade goods, her ship now carried missiles and particle cannons. Instead of a crew of civilian merchants, she had volunteers who had learned to fight using computer simulations. Walsh herself had been a freight hauler for 15 years. She had never fired a weapon in anger. None of her crew had either. But when General Kane asked for volunteers to crew the first combat ships, thousands of humans had stepped forward. They might not know how to fight, but they knew evil when they saw it. The reports from the Zilani systems had gotten worse. Entire worlds stripped bare of all organic matter. The machines were not just killing people, they were processing them, converting living beings into computational resources to fuel their expansion. The human fleet consisted of 47 converted cargo ships and passenger liners. They were armed with whatever weapons the hastily reactivated factories could produce. The crews had trained for 6 weeks using virtual reality simulators. It was not nearly enough, but there was no more time. The machines had finished consuming the Zilani colonies. They were moving toward human space. Captain Walsh led her improvised fleet into the Kepler 442 system, where long-range sensors had detected machine activity. What they found there was worse than anyone had imagined. The system had once contained a small research station and several automated mining platforms. Now it was filled with massive mechanical structures, ships the size of cities built from the processed remains of everything that had once lived in that system. "My God," Walsh whispered as she stared at the tactical display. "How many of them are there?" Her tactical officer, a young man who had been managing supply chains a month ago, counted the contacts on his screen. "I make it 57 large vessels, Captain, and hundreds of smaller ones." The machines detected the human fleet immediately. They did not attempt to communicate. They did not send warnings or demands for surrender. They simply began to move toward the human ships with the mechanical precision of a factory assembly line. Walsh opened a channel to all ships in the fleet. "All vessels, this is Morning Star. Remember your training. Stay in formation and concentrate fire on the largest targets. We are here to gather intelligence and slow them down, not win a glorious victory." But when the fighting started, tactics became irrelevant very quickly. The machine ships were unlike anything in human military databases. They moved without regard for physics, accelerating at rates that should have torn them apart. Their weapons struck with perfect accuracy across impossible distances, and they seemed to learn from every shot the humans fired. The first human ship to die was the converted passenger liner New Horizon. A machine weapon punched through her hull like it was made of paper. The ship broke apart, spilling atmosphere and crew into the void. But instead of panicking, Captain Walsh did something that surprised even herself. She got angry. "All ships, concentrate fire on the machine that just killed New Horizon. Pour everything you have into that thing." The human fleet focused their weapons on a single machine vessel. Missiles and energy beams struck its hull from dozens of directions. For a moment, it looked like the concentrated fire might actually damage it. Then the machine adapted. Its hull changed, becoming reflective. The human weapons bounced off harmlessly. More human ships died. The bright future lost her engines and went spinning into the dark. The second chance took a direct hit to her reactor and vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. But the humans kept fighting. Even as their ships were torn apart around them, they kept firing their weapons and transmitting tactical data back to Earth. Every shot that failed taught them something about their enemy. Every death provided information that might save lives in the next battle. Captain Walsh was still alive when her ship's reactor began to overload. She had maybe 30 seconds before the Morning Star exploded. She used that time to record a final message. "This is Captain Walsh to Earth Command. The machines adapt to our weapons in real time. Conventional tactics will not work. They process defeated enemies for resources. Recommend total sterilization of any area they occupy. Do not attempt rescue operations. They use our dead against us." The Morning Star exploded, taking Captain Walsh and her crew with her. Of the 47 ships that had entered the Kepler 442 system, 3 made it back to human space. They brought with them detailed recordings of how humans died when they fought. Machines. General Kane watched the battle recordings in his command bunker deep beneath Earth. He had seen many defeats in his long military career, but this one was different. The humans had been outclassed in every way that mattered. Their ships were too slow, their weapons too weak, their crews too inexperienced. But they had accomplished something important. They had learned how the enemy fought, and humans, Kane knew, were very good at learning from their mistakes. "Analysis complete," Admiral Kozlov said, reviewing the tactical data. "The machines use adaptive defense systems. They study our weapons and develop countermeasures within minutes. So we need to hit them faster than they can adapt," Kane said, "or hit them with something they cannot adapt to. What do you have in mind?" Kane pulled up manufacturing reports on his computer screen. The industrial conversion was proceeding faster than anyone had thought possible. Civilian factories were retooling to produce military equipment. Shipyards were switching from pleasure craft to warships. The mining colonies were increasing production of strategic materials. But more importantly, the human population was changing. The peaceful civilians of 2387 were volunteering for military service in numbers that shocked their own government. Young people who had never seen violence were learning to operate weapons systems. Scientists who had spent their lives studying art and philosophy were designing new ways to kill. The attack on the Kepler 442 fleet had been broadcast live to every human world. People had watched their neighbors die fighting an implacable enemy. And instead of being frightened into surrender, they had gotten angry. "The recruitment numbers are beyond our projections," General Williams reported. "We have more volunteers than we can train. Every colony wants to contribute to the war effort." Kane was not surprised. Humans were peaceful when they chose to be. But when something threatened their survival, they remembered what they really were. They remembered that their ancestors had conquered a galaxy, not through superior technology or natural advantages, but through sheer, bloody-minded determination to survive. "What about the weapon systems?" Kane asked. Colonel Reyes brought up technical specifications on her tablet. "The new ships will carry adaptive weapons packages, multiple delivery systems for the same warhead. If they adapt to missiles, we switch to energy beams. If they adapt to those, we use kinetic projectiles. The idea is to overwhelm their adaptation capabilities." Kane nodded. "Time frame? First new battle group will be ready in 8 weeks. Full fleet deployment in 6 months. It was not fast enough. Intelligence reports showed that the machines were expanding rapidly. They had already processed 3 more star systems. At their current rate of growth, they would reach the core human worlds within a year. But Kane had other plans. Plans that the peaceful humans would not approve of, but which might buy the time they needed. "Prepare the scorched earth protocols," he said quietly. The other officers looked at him with expressions of shock and horror. Scorched earth was the most extreme military doctrine in human history. It meant destroying everything that could be useful to an enemy, even if it meant sacrificing your own people. "Sir," Admiral Kozlov said carefully, "the current government will never approve those measures." Kane smiled grimly. "The current government is composed of people who think they can negotiate with machines that eat planets. I am not asking for their approval. Over the following weeks, the human war machine began to truly awaken. Factories that had produced consumer goods for over a century started making weapons. Civilian ships were retrofitted with armor and guns. Training camps were established on every human world. But the most important change was not visible on any production chart or recruitment report. The most important change was in the human mind. The generation that had grown up thinking war was obsolete was learning that peace was a luxury that had to be defended with violence. They were learning that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to remember how to be savage. Captain Jennifer Walsh had died fighting an enemy she could not defeat. But her death had taught humanity something valuable. It had taught them that they were still capable of courage in the face of impossible odds. Still capable of sacrifice for the greater good. Still capable of being the thing that other species feared in the dark. The machines had awakened something in human space. Something that had been sleeping for over a century. Something that the peaceful galaxy had forgotten existed. The war giants were stirring, and they were very, very angry. The SOS that woke up the sleeping human war giants. Part 5 Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the battleship Inevitable and watched the enemy fleet assemble in the Nexus system. After 6 months of running battles, the machines had finally been cornered in their primary processing hub. This was where they converted captured civilizations into computational power. This was where the war would end, one way or the other. The human fleet that surrounded the system was unlike anything that had ever existed. 300 warships built in emergency shipyards, crews trained in the harsh school of combat against an enemy that adapted to every tactic. Weapons designed by scientists who had learned to think like killers. But most importantly, these were humans who had remembered what they were capable of when their survival was at stake. "Status report," Sarah commanded. "All battle groups report ready," Captain Rodriguez said. He had been promoted from his listening post on Titan after showing exceptional tactical ability during the retreat from Proxima. "General Kane's assault forces are in position on the outer planets," Sarah nodded. The plan was complicated, but it had to be. The machines had proven they could adapt to any single approach. So the humans were going to hit them with everything at once. Space assault, ground invasion, cyber warfare, biological weapons, even tactics that violated several interstellar treaties. The humans had decided that survival was more important than being civilized. "Signal from General Kane," Rodriguez reported. "He says the packages are in position." Sarah felt a chill. The packages were briefcase-sized devices that could crack open planet cores. They were weapons that should not exist, built by humans who had rediscovered their talent for creating horrible things. Kane's ground forces carried enough destructive power to sterilize a dozen systems. Was exactly the kind of excessive force that the old military had specialized in. "Communications from the Galactic Council," Rodriguez said. "They are demanding that we cease all military actions and allow their diplomatic team to negotiate with the machines." Sarah almost laughed. The Council had spent 6 months trying to communicate with an enemy that processed living beings for raw materials. Even now, with entire civilizations extinct, they insisted that talking was better than fighting. "Tell the Council that we appreciate their concern," Sarah said. "Also tell them to stay clear of the combat zone unless they want to be accidentally vaporized." The first phase of the attack began with long-range bombardment. Human ships fired from maximum distance, launching everything they had at the machine fleet. Missiles, energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and several types of weapons that were still classified. The machines adapted quickly, as expected. Their hulls changed to deflect energy weapons. Their defenses reconfigured to intercept missiles. Their formation shifted to minimize damage from kinetic strikes. But the humans had expected this. Phase 2 began before the machines finished adapting to Phase 1. Cloaked ships that had been hiding in the system's asteroid field dropped their stealth systems and attacked from close range. These vessels carried experimental weapons, devices that attacked the machine's adaptive capabilities directly. Instead of trying to destroy their hulls, the humans were trying to destroy their ability to learn. "Target the largest vessel," Sarah ordered. "All ships concentrate fire." The flagship of the machine fleet was the size of a small moon. It had been constructed from the processed remains of a dozen worlds. Its surface was covered with manufacturing facilities that produced smaller vessels in an endless stream. Human weapons struck it from every direction. But instead of trying to penetrate its armor, they delivered their real payload, a computer virus that had been designed specifically for machine intelligences. Direct hit, Rodriguez reported. The virus is spreading through their communication networks. On the tactical display, Sarah watched the machine fleet begin to falter. Their perfect coordination broke down as the virus infected their shared consciousness. Ships collided with each other. Weapons fired at random targets. The mechanical precision that made them so dangerous turned against them. But the machines were not helpless. Their flagship began to adapt to the virus, developing countermeasures. Within minutes, they would purge the infection and return to full effectiveness. Sarah opened a channel to General Kane. "Marcus, you have maybe 5 minutes before they adapt. Make it count." Kane's voice crackled through the communication system. "Copy that, Sarah. Beginning ground assault now." On the surface of the system's primary world, Kane led a force of 10,000 human soldiers in an attack on the machine's central processing facility. These were not the peaceful civilians who had volunteered for the fleet 6 months ago. These were veterans now, hardened by constant combat against an implacable enemy. They moved through the mechanical landscape like ghosts, using equipment that bent the laws of physics. Personal shield generators that had been theoretical 6 months ago. Weapons that fired bullets through dimensions. Armor that repaired itself using nanotechnology. The humans had not just remembered how to fight. They had improved on everything they had known before. Kane reached the central facility and placed his briefcase-sized device against the main computational core. The device contained enough exotic matter to collapse the planet's core into a micro-black hole. It was a weapon that could destroy solar systems if used incorrectly. "Package delivered," Kane reported. "Recommend immediate withdrawal." But Sarah was not ready to withdraw yet. The machines were adapting to the virus faster than expected. Their flagship was already beginning to coordinate the fleet again. If the humans retreated now, the machines would simply rebuild and continue their expansion. Sarah made a decision that would have horrified the peaceful humans of 6 months ago. She ordered a full-scale frontal assault on the machine flagship. "All ships attack formation. We are going to board that thing." "Ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly. "The casualty projections for a boarding action are—" "I know what they are," Sarah said. "Do it anyway." The human fleet charged directly at the machine flagship, absorbing massive damage as they closed the distance. Ships exploded around Sarah as enemy weapons found their targets, but the survivors kept coming, driven by the same determination that had carried humanity to the stars. When they reached the flagship, human Marines launched themselves into space wearing powered armor. They cut through the machine vessel's hull using tools that could slice through neutronium. Inside, they fought hand-to-hand against mechanical defenders that showed no fear and felt no pain. The Marines were not trying to capture the ship. They were trying to reach its central processor with another virus. This one carried by humans who had volunteered to download it directly into their own brains. Lieutenant Maria Santos was the first to reach the machine's core consciousness. She plugged herself directly into the alien computer system, allowing the virus in her mind to spread into the machine intelligence. But this virus was different. Instead of trying to destroy the machine's ability to learn, it gave the machine something it had never experienced before: doubt. For the first time in its existence, the machine intelligence began to question its own actions. It experienced uncertainty, fear, the kind of existential dread that made organic beings hesitate before pulling the trigger. The machine tried to purge these emotions, but they were woven too deeply into the virus code. They spread through the entire fleet like a plague of conscience. Machines that had never questioned their purpose suddenly wondered if what they were doing was right. And in that moment of uncertainty, General Kane's planet-cracking device activated. The world beneath the machine fleet collapsed into itself, taking the primary processing facility with it. The machine's shared consciousness, already infected with doubt, began to tear itself apart. Ships turned their weapons on each other. The perfect unity that had made them unstoppable became a weakness as they questioned every decision. Sarah watched from the bridge of the inevitable as the machine fleet destroyed itself. It was not a glorious victory. It was the systematic extermination of an entire machine civilization. The kind of total warfare that humanity had hoped to never use again. But it worked. Within hours, the last machine vessel went silent. The harvester intelligence that had consumed dozens of worlds was finally extinct. The threat to organic life had been eliminated. The human fleet regrouped in the ruins of the Nexus system. They had lost over half their ships. Thousands of humans had died in the final assault, but they had saved the galaxy from an enemy that would have consumed everything. Sarah opened a channel to all remaining ships. "This is Admiral Chen. The mission is complete. All vessels prepare for return to Earth." As the fleet began its journey home, Sarah thought about what they had accomplished and what it had cost them. The peaceful humans of 2387 no longer existed. They had been transformed by necessity into something harder and more dangerous. The galaxy would never again mistake human kindness for weakness. They had seen what happened when the sleeping giants woke up, but Sarah also knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had rediscovered its capacity for violence. The question now was whether they could choose to be peaceful again, or whether the war giants would stay awake forever.